So we were talking about why evidences matter on Sunday morning before we finish. And we're going to continue that. We got like 3 slides, I think, left before we actually move on to the next material. So some important terminology to understand. You will hear me say in this class not only evidences, you will also hear me use the word apologetics. Apologetics is simply the technical term for the study of evidences. Okay? So you see that quite a bit. You might have been to Mardell. Mardell's Bible bookstore. Anybody know where Mardell is? On 35. I bet you know where Hobby Lobby is, right? Yeah, it's 2 doors down. Okay? So if you go to Mardell, you might go in there and you might see the Apologetics Study Bible. Okay? I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that that's the title of it. Apologetics means evidences. So theoretically in that study Bible, they point out some things that are about evidences in the course of the Bible. That's simply, again, that technical term for that. The English word apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which has nothing to do with apologies. Okay? If you're saying, I'm sorry, you apologize. Okay? It may come from this Greek word as well, but that's not what it means here. Okay? The Greek word apology means a defense as a legal technical term, a speech in defense of oneself, a reply, a verbal defense, as a religious technical term, defense of the gospel message from false teaching. That's according to the analytical lexicon of the New Testament. This particular Greek word is used several times in the New Testament. It's used, for example, in Acts chapter 22 and verse 1. Let's go over there and look at that. Acts chapter 22, verse 1. Acts 22 and verse 1. And looking intently at the council, Paul said, Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. Okay? So you're looking at 22, that was 23:1. Now I'm looking forward to it, I'm thinking, where in the world is my word? How about 22 verse 1? Brothers and fathers, hear the defense that I now make before you. Okay, that English word defense is translated from apologia. Look in chapter 25, verse 16. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had opportunity to make his apologia, defense, concerning the charge laid against him. Also, 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 3, Philippians 1 and verse 7, also verse 16 in the same chapter, 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 16, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. It's also used in 2 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 11. It gets an interesting translation there, so we'll just note that. 2 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 11. For see what earnestness this godly grief has produced in you, but also what eagerness to clear yourselves. That is the word apologia. I should have written to clear so that it's clear. It is the verb. What indignation, what fear, what longing, what zeal, what punishment, anyway, it goes on. So here it gets translated into English as to where did I lose it? To clear oneself or to clear yourselves. It is the same Greek word, but it has the idea of making a defense. Okay, it was used in legal courts in the first century for making a defense, and it was also used among Christians as defending the gospel message from false teaching. So again, apologetics, evidences, we use both words. I will probably use evidences more frequently in the class simply because that's a word that we tend to be a little bit more familiar with. All right, so some other important terminology. We need to talk about the word proof. The word proof is defined by the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary as the cogency of evidence that compels acceptance by the mind of a truth or fact, something that induces certainty or establishes validity. Proof is very, very important. We use proof quite a bit, don't we, in life? Yes. Right? Somebody makes a claim, we say what? Prove it or show me. Okay, show me. Give me some evidence of what you're talking about. So that's the technical definition of it. Proof is used in every area of human knowledge. We use this all the time. If you go into the doctor has run some tests on you, and the doctor discusses those test results with you, what's he going to show you in all likelihood? He's going to show you the proof. Okay, I had an MRI done about a year ago, and the guy that read the MRI wrote all the technical stuff in there, and when I'm discussing that with the doctor is discussing with me what the radiologist wrote. Okay, and if the doctor doesn't necessarily agree with that or wants a second opinion, what might the doctor do? Do another MRI, okay, to get some proof. He might even ask for the pictures, okay, or the video or whatever they take when it's an MRI. He might ask for that as proof, okay? We're used to proof. We use proof all the time. You get pulled over by the police officers, what do they want to see?
License.
They want to see your driver's license and proof of insurance, okay? You go in to get a driver's license, you got to show proof of insurance, all right? We do this all the time in society where we're looking for proof. It's used in every area of human knowledge. However, standards of proof vary depending upon the field. There is scientific proof, there's historical proof, there's legal proof, and so on. These differences are going to be discussed more in depth later in this class. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about proof and the different kinds of proof and how proof works. Right? We do not prove things all in the same way, do we? There's scientific proof. How many of you are taking any kind of, you can raise your hand, don't say what you're taking, but how many of you are taking some kind of medicine, medical medicine, not supplements, something actually prescribed by a doctor? Okay? Most of us, except the really young ones, probably aren't. Maybe even some of the young ones as well. How does the doctor know to prescribe you that medicine?
Blood work for me.
Well, blood work, but also there's been a lot of scientific study of the medicine. The doctor just doesn't come in one day and say, here you go, Stephen. This is usually for this other disease, but I think it'll work for you too. Go ahead and take it. I'd have to really trust that doctor a lot to do that. I understand some medicines are taken off label, but the reason they're taken off label is because there's a body of evidence or proof that says they can be used that way. It's scientific proof. And so that's one kind of proof. Historical proof is a different kind of proof. Legal proof is a different kind of proof as well. We're going to look at some of these terminologies, some of these areas again later in the class in more depth. We also have to ask ourselves as we finish up this section of the material, we have to ask ourselves what is reasonable. When we talk about evidences, we're talking about what is reasonable. As we consider the areas of evidence in this class, I cannot present 100% proof. I cannot prove to you 100% that Jesus was raised from the dead. I cannot prove to you 100% that God exists. If you're looking for 100% proof, you're in the wrong class. Okay? Because I can't give that to you as we consider the things that we're going to be looking at in this class. There can be alternate explanations to virtually every area of knowledge. So, for example, in our society today, and isn't the internet great? We have flat earthers. Yes, that is a thing. There are a whole bunch of people out there who believe the earth is actually flat. Right? Probably the rest of us would look at that. We would say, well, wasn't that kind of debunked in the past? And I'm saying we kind of debunked that in the past, but having those astronauts up there in the sky above us circulating around the earth, that would kind of tend to say the earth isn't flat, right? Except for our third one over there, man has never been to the mooners. I don't know how else to say that. Okay? There are those who deny that we ever put people on the moon. Corollary to that is we never put people in space. So we really don't know that the earth is round. See how this works together? Okay? Holocaust deniers. That's something that's very real. Okay? People deny that there was a Holocaust. They deny that 6 million Jews and 6 million other people were murdered by the Nazis in death camps. They deny all of that. All right? So virtually anything that we're looking at, there can be an alternate explanation to it. But given the evidence, the question we have to ask is what is reasonable? Is it reasonable to believe that the United States, in its great desire to beat the Soviets to the moon, came up with a conspiracy that said we're going to tell everyone we actually put somebody on the moon, even though we didn't put anybody on the moon. We're going to fake all these pictures and fake all this video and fake the television. It was broadcast live, wasn't it? When they set foot on the moon?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was real. Brain.
It was right before I was born. That's why I have to ask that question, okay? That could have all been faked, right? Sure. Theoretically, if you want to bad enough, it could all be faked, okay? But then the question becomes, what is reasonable? Is it reasonable that in the 55 years since man landed on the moon that no one has come up and said, the United States didn't really put anybody on the moon? You would think the Soviets and the Chinese would do that if anybody could, all right? So we have to ask ourselves what is reasonable. It gets really, really difficult these days. I put in parentheses over there, isn't the internet great? I think the internet is a great thing. I think it's a great source of information. It's also a great source of disinformation. Okay? And we should be well aware of that. This is not a political statement, but I don't think there's any doubt at all that enemies of this country have manipulated our previous election, and they are probably going to try to manipulate the current election. Okay, that's the world we live in. That's the battlefield. It isn't just men and women with tanks and guns and airplanes. It is also a war of information and a war of what's out there and what people choose to believe. Okay, so again, in any of that, it's what is reasonable. And I will say this. Okay, any area of information that we're looking at, whether it be Christian evidences, as the case may be, or whatever, we need to ask ourselves what is reasonable. Okay, lots of theories out there sound really, really good, and lots of people can write theories in such a way that people are going to believe them. After all, Jim Jones convinced 1,000 people to drink the Kool-Aid in Guyana, French Guyana, and commit mass suicide. You all remember that, right? The People's Temple, right? How do you convince 1,000 people to do that? Well, you convince them that your vision of reality is the correct one, and everyone else is out to get you. When you do that, drinking the Kool-Aid, by the way, that's where for our younger people, that's where we get that term, don't drink the Kool-Aid, okay? That's what they did. And not all of them committed suicide. Some of them were forced to drink the Kool-Aid. But they went down there. They followed the man down there in that cult, all right? So we're used to this kind of with cults, but it can happen in politics. It can happen anywhere, okay? So we need to, as Christians, ask ourselves what is reasonable. I will also say this. This is also not a political statement and not intended in any way to be one. But brothers and sisters, especially in the given world that we live in now, we need to be really, really careful. Because when we espouse junk theories and then we try to talk to people about the gospel, what do we lose? We lose our credibility. That's exactly right. When we're espousing things, and how many of y'all remember, the Shyamalan movie, The Tinfoil Hat? Come on, which one was it? What was the name of it?
Fly? The Fly is one?
No, not The Fly. It's where the aliens come to Earth and he's wearing a tinfoil hat, and now it's become a joke about wearing a tinfoil hat. I can't remember it. It's a Shyamalan movie.
Science.
Okay? Science, thank you. Science.
The kids were...
Yeah, he's wearing a tinfoil hat so they can't read his mind. Okay?
You don't believe it?
No. The point is, if we're not careful what we're repeating or what we're espousing, there's a real danger that then people are not going to believe things that we're saying that are reasonable. Okay? And I will just take this opportunity to say this as well when it comes to evidences. There's some stuff that's put out there as evidences. It's junk. It's just junk. And we need to avoid junk, right? So, for example, when someone comes along and says they found the chariots from Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea, only it's not really the Red Sea, it's the other little body of water over there, because Mount Sinai is actually not in Arabia. It's actually not in Sinai. It's over here in Saudi Arabia. It's junk, okay? There are no chariot wheels, not from Pharaoh's time, in the Red Sea. Okay? But people will say things like this, or we found, what do we find? In Ararat. What do we find up there in Ararat? We found the Ark. That was a big thing way back in the 1980s when I was younger. We found the Ark. And of course it's way out there in eastern Turkey, which is a hot zone between the Kurds and the Turks, and so nobody can actually go out there and look at it. But they found something on the satellite photo. Okay?
One piece of
This stuff gets parroted over and over. It's like the missing day. NASA found the missing day. How many of y'all heard that? I heard that growing up. No, they didn't. They didn't find the missing day. Okay? So there's a lot of stuff out there that parades itself as evidences that isn't evidences. How do we know the difference?
What's an example?
You got to work at it. Okay? You got to work at it. You got to get information, get other viewpoints, and probably form a synthesis of that. Somebody asked me a while back during the pandemic, how I know what news to trust. How do you know what news to trust? You read a whole bunch of it. My response was, well, I read Fox News, and I read MSNBC, and because I follow what goes on in the Czech Republic, I read Czech News as well because they comment on world events. And in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, okay, between all of those outlets, right? We just have to be really, really careful what we're looking at, and we need to be really, really careful what we just repeat without examining it ourselves carefully and critically. And in this class, we talk about evidences. I'm going to present some stuff here, and it's possible that y'all may not understand it. Say so. It's possible that you may look at that and you may say, it doesn't make sense to me. Say so. It's possible you may look at that and say, I don't agree with that. Say so. Okay? You're not going to hurt my feelings, and I hope I won't hurt your feelings when I reply, because I'm not going to present anything in this class that I'm not convinced of. But you may not be convinced of it. Okay? So we may, in a friendly way, exchange opinions together. Okay? And as long as we can do that in a friendly way, in a brotherly way, is there a problem with that? No. Absolutely not. Okay? Thin skins get left at the door. We got to be thick-skinned in here. Okay? Just in case that comes up, because it may come up. All right. Any questions about any of this? Questions or comments? Okay. That ended topic 1. So now we're going to go to topic 2, and I have to actually open that file. So give me a second to do that. Faith. And I am enjoying Keynote, but I don't feel like I have to tell you that. All right, there we go. So Christian evidences, topic 2, faith and unbelief. Okay, so let's spend a little time talking about this evening, whatever time we have. When we finish, that's where we stop, and we'll just pick right up on Sunday morning. When we talk about faith and belief, I think it is vitally important for us to understand the nature of faith. There is a popular conception out there in the world that faith and reason are opposed to each other, or faith is quote-unquote blind. Okay? How many of y'all have ever heard that before? Yeah. That faith is blind, or if you believe, that's not reasonable. Maybe y'all have heard that. Some of you have. Okay? Linda may have heard that because she worked in a scientific type environment, because she was a pharmacist. Okay? You may have heard that. Bob may have heard that because he worked in a scientific environment. Charlotte worked in schools. And so you may have heard this in different places. The idea that you cannot believe and at the same time be reasonable. There's a great sign. I love this. Maybe it's not the best in front of the church, but if you go out 287 towards where we live, there's a Methodist church over on the right side right before you get to our Walmart. And they have a sign up there, and the sign says, bring your brain, bring your Bible. I don't know whether it's the first one or how that exactly is, but the idea is you need to use both. Bring your brain, bring your Bible. All right? And we understand that when it comes to understand the Bible, don't we? Do we not have to use our brains to understand Scripture? Absolutely. Okay? There is nothing in opposition between faith and reason. Faith, I'm going to present to you in this class, is not blind. I do not believe in God because Mom and Dad taught me to believe in God. I do not believe in God because it's more comfortable for me to believe in God. I believe in God. I believe in the resurrection of Jesus because I have looked at the evidence, and at least in my mind, belief in God and belief in the resurrection is reasonable. Okay? It's a reasonable explanation of the evidence. And in my mind, it's more reasonable than the alternative. Okay? And we're going to talk a lot about that in this class. But there's this popular conception that's out there. Popular conception that you also cannot be a scientist and a believer. We're going to have a topic on that in this class if we get to it called the soul of science. That title is taken from a book called The Soul of Science. Okay? And the whole idea in that book is demonstrating that all of the great scientists that have come up with such revolutionary ideas that make our world what it is today were all believers. Kepler was a believer. Galileo was a believer. Newton was a believer. None of them threw out their faith in God because of their scientific bent. But today in science, there is a prevailing idea that if you're a real scientist, you don't believe in God. You don't believe in the Bible. We'll talk about that in this class because it simply isn't true. A lot of the evidence that I'll present to y'all, especially as we get to evolution, we're going to spend time on evolution in this class, that's evidence that has been compiled and put together by preachers in their studies, right? Scientists. Okay, scientists. All right. By the way, scientists who publish that kind of material have a hard time getting published because a lot of the scientific journals won't want it. They don't want it because it's against the prevailing view. Okay, we'll talk about that more later in class. All right. So I got a quote from you from a man whose name is John Gibbon. That quote says, "Ask devout Christians whether they believe that Christ died and rose again, and they will say that of course they do. Ask them for evidence, and they will be baffled by the question. It is not a matter of evidence, but of belief. Asking for evidence indicates doubt, and with doubt there is no faith." You agree with that? Do you personally agree with that quote? I'm asking this on two levels, and I'm not being clear. I need to be clear. Is that an idea that we run across among people who make a claim to be Christian?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Is that an accurate way of looking at the difference between faith and evidence?
No.
No, it's not. And I will tell you that in the Scriptures, God gives us evidence. The heavens declare what?
Glory of God.
The glory of God. The psalmist just came up with that as a neat idea. God made the heavens the way they are to show His glory, and God tells us that. God says, don't just accept somebody's word for it. Look around. Look at everything that is. And what's really interesting about that is we're unfortunate here in Fort Worth that we are covered by light pollution. So we go out at night and we see a few stars. Go to Big Bend. Some of you are old enough and have grown up in the country that you remember what a time was like without light pollution, when the sky was filled with stars. Big Bend National Park is one of the few last places in America that's not tainted with light pollution at night, so the photographers go out there to take pictures of the stars. All right? And then we have the Hubble telescope. And those little points of light up there, the millions of them that we've been able to see, now we see them up close. And they're even more glorious than they were before when we see what's going on. God says, look at the heavens, know that I am. Look at the heavens and see how they declare my glory. We'll talk more about that in this class as well. The point is, God gives us evidence. God just doesn't come along and say, Wesley, believe because it feels good. God says, Stacy, believe because here's the why. Okay. So this is what people think, but this isn't what God expects from us. So Stacy and then Tim.
And the issue with this statement is it's an exclusionary statement. It says belief cannot exist with evidence.
Yeah, it is. It's exclusionary. It's one or the other, not both. Tim?
Would that statement still be false when it comes down to the scenario where the doubting Thomas rule? Where Thomas is doubting, and then he said, "Blessed are those that will see," and that you've seen, but there were those that will not see and still believe. I'm thinking that was.
Why will they believe though?
Oh, yeah, because of the evidence. Yeah.
Because of the evidence. Yeah. What does John also say in his gospel? Go to the Gospel of John.
That's
let's
what
go over to John.
These things are written that you may believe.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. So Charlotte's got it for us. Let's actually go look at the text. All right. So you've got John chapter 20, verse 28, 29. Thomas answered him, there's Jesus, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said to him, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And then immediately verse 30, John's commentary. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in his name. So, yes, Thomas sees Jesus with his own eyes. We don't see Jesus with our own eyes. But Jesus says, blessed are those who have not seen yet have believed, and John says what the basis for that belief is. It's the evidence. It's the evidence. And God provides a ton of evidence. So, the quote itself is accurate because that's what a lot of people in the believing world think, and that's what a lot of people outside the believing world think that believers ought to think. We know better. Okay? Or we should. If you've come into this class thinking faith is blind, then my job in this class is to convince you it is not. Your faith is built on rock solid evidence. Okay. All right, let's continue on. So the question then becomes for us, what is biblical faith? Okay? The basic idea of faith is trust. It is a confidence that God will perform what he has said. Biblical faith is much more confident than merely, quote, I think something is such and such. Criticism of Bible classes. Criticism of Bible classes. 30 people in a room. You're studying the book of Romans. 30 people in the room. The teacher has prepared his material. He's done his study. And Brother X read Romans 2 quickly in the classroom before class started. But Brother X thinks that Romans 2:13 means such and such, when it's not what it means. Okay? You ever been in Bible classes like that? You heard people just say things that clearly they had not studied the text before they said that? Yeah. Okay? It happens. It's happened to all of us. It's happened to me. Okay? Bible faith is not sitting there saying, I think something is such and such. Bible faith is looking at what God has told us, looking at the evidence, and saying, I think something is such and such because. And then being able to list the reasons why. Right? So, in this class, we talk about the resurrection, we talk about the existence of God. Our goal is to be able to come out of those discussions being able to say, I think God exists because, boom, boom, boom. I believe Jesus was raised because, I believe the earth was created in 6 days because, I believe the Bible is true because, I believe the Bible is accurate and trustworthy because. Right? That's what we're going to be presenting, is evidence for the faith. Biblical faith is much more confident than just saying, I think, or I hope. Okay. There is certainly thinking, there is certainly confidence, there is certainly hope, but it is based on evidence. Right? This kind of faith, right, biblical faith, requires 3 things, all of which must be present in the believer. So let's look at those. The first of those is understanding. Doyle Moyer, who is a fellow evangelist, says in his book, without some understanding of a given statement of belief, then it cannot be taken seriously. So I make an argument from the scriptures in a Bible class. I give nothing to back it up other than, I think so. Can it be taken seriously? It might be right. Okay, the person might be right in the statement. But without any kind of evidence, it's kind of hard to know whether you can take that seriously or not. Without some understanding of a given statement of belief, then it cannot be taken seriously. Going along with that, we must understand something about God in order to express faith in Him. Let's go over to Acts chapter 17. We will not read much from the Scriptures in this class, surprisingly, but when we do have some Scriptures up there, I do like to at least look at some of them. So Acts chapter 17, starting in verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your poets have said. For we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. So, as you look at these verses where Paul is talking in Athens, first of all, he's dealing with people that are religious, right? The Athenians are very religious. He tells them that. They're so religious, in fact, they have all these shrines and all these idols, but what if we miss one?
Unknown.
We're going to make one to the unknown God. Okay? Just in case. So Paul comes along and explains to them something about that unknown God. And the unknown God for them is the God revealed in Scriptures. Okay? So he talks about some things there. He doesn't dwell in temples, right? He's appointed a day. He's commanded everyone to repent, right? There's a whole lot of details in there. But it is all based on understanding. Okay? Paul gives a very accurate and very short picture of what the God of the Bible is, what he's like, what he expects. Right? So understanding, our biblical faith is based in understanding. Stated differently, it is based on knowledge. Okay? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of Christ. Okay? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of Christ, the Word of God. We gain knowledge through hearing. We gain faith through hearing. Okay? That's why I emphasize, when I had the opportunity out there in the auditorium during the evangelism class, to stress that friendship evangelism is great. Get to know your neighbors. Invite them over. Get to know your coworkers. Show them what a good person you are. Be a good person. I mean, you're not showing off. Be a good person. They will notice that. But until you start talking to them about Jesus Christ, they are not going to believe the gospel. There has to be a move from, you're my friend, you're my coworker, to, I want to share with you Jesus Christ. Because until you do that, they're not going to move in that direction. Faith is based on understanding. Okay? That's the first. Number two, biblical faith is a readiness to act. There must exist a connection between what we claim to believe and our actions. Stated differently, we need to not be what? Hypocrites. Okay? Are we all hypocritical at some point in time in our lives? Yes, every single one. Well, I can't say every single one of us. Okay? I think probably most of us have been at some point in time hypocritical. Okay? I won't make a blanket statement because it's possible that somebody is not. But there needs to be a connection between what we claim to believe and our actions. Our actions need to reflect our claims to believe. Ancient Israel demonstrated a lack of faith through their disobedience. So we can go over to Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 3, and we'll look here verses 12 through 19. Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. First of all, let me just say this. Once saved, always saved is not true, based on that verse alone. Okay? So take care, lest that evil, unbelieving heart leads you away from the living God. Verse 13, but exhort one another every day as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have come to share in Christ if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end. As it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. This was a generation that saw the plagues on Egypt. This was a generation that heard the wailings in the Egyptian households as they made their way out of Egypt. As in all these households, the firstborn was dead. This was a generation that saw the water turn to blood. This was a generation that crossed the Red Sea on dry ground and then saw Pharaoh's army drowned in the Red Sea. This was a generation that was given manna, water from a rock, quail when they got tired of just eating manna. And what did they do? They rebelled. And when they get to the edge of the promised land and they send those spies in, and 12 of them come back, 2 of them say, we can take the land. 10 of them say, oh no, we can't. And they wander for 40 years in the wilderness. Their belief did not match their actions. Okay? So biblical faith involves understanding. It involves a readiness to act. And then finally, it involves reasons or reason for our belief. Faith cannot be based on an I believe just because attitude. It cannot be. Because if it is, eventually it will falter and it will fail. Okay? If nothing else, it will not be a faith that you can share with others. Because, Linda, it's great that you just believe because. But that ain't going to work for me. Okay? We need to be ready to give a defense. There's our word, apologia, for our hope. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts, Peter says, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense, apologia, to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Why do you believe? We need to be prepared to give a defense. Why do you believe what you do about the Scriptures? We need to be prepared to give a defense. Why do you believe baptism is essential? We need to be ready to give a defense. Why do you believe we shouldn't use instrumental music? We need to be ready to give a defense. Okay? If we cannot defend our faith or our actions, that calls into question our faith and our actions. Okay? So, understanding, that's the mind. A readiness to act, that's putting into practice what we understand, and we need to have a reason for it. And the corollary, I could add number 4 up there, is the ability to share that with others. Okay? Now, there's a real danger as we look at this to have the idea that that's for the professionals. It's not for the professionals. Okay? we have no professionals. What we have is a Bible, as a preacher who works at it full time. I am not a professional in the sense of the word, in the sense of the way the word is used. We are all to be people who are able to do this. Maybe we haven't practiced as I just said that. Maybe we've not practiced as much. Maybe I have more experience, but how did I get that experience? I went to an 8-year seminary, right? When I got to get that experience. Nope. I didn't. Studied, and I put it into practice. How do we get that practice? By doing it. By practicing what we believe. Okay? And the more you practice, what happens? The better you get. Stacy teaches piano. She probably takes... You did, used to?
I did.
Okay. Probably had some students that knew nothing about a piano. And how do you get good? You practice and you take a lot of lessons.
And your teacher can
So
tell
that
when
you get the knowledge.
Yes.
And then you practice.
And your teacher can tell when you haven't practiced.
Absolutely.
Or if you practiced for 3 hours right before you came.
Just like a Bible class teacher can tell you read Romans chapter 2 in your car before you came into the church building. Trust me. Preachers are very good at reading audiences. I can tell you right now, you may not sleep when I preach, but sometimes I can tell when you're thinking about dinner or lunch. Okay? All right. Tim, you had a question.
Oh.
You forgot it already?
No, I just kind of sidetracked because you made that comment, so I was thinking about it. I'm in your class.
Did I just sidetrack? Is that what you just said, that I sidetracked you?
From my question, yes.
Go ahead, Tim.
Anyway. No, so how do you get the person that knows that they need to talk to certain people, but yet has a fear of talking to those people and not wanting to do it because of that fear? Possibly losing them as friends and everything else.
You ever seen the little clip, Bob Newhart, Stop It? Look it up on YouTube.
I've never seen it.
Bob Newhart, Stop It. If you do that search on YouTube, you will get it. Leslie seen it?
I don't think I've seen it. No.
Okay.
Well, he doesn't even know who Bob Newhart is.
Okay. It's a funny little clip, and I realized that
What's it called?
Stop It.
I have to look that up.
Now, I realize that, and I don't want to be flippant towards mental illness because it's a woman that's got a fear of being buried alive in a box. Okay? And he's discussing that with her in their little therapy session. Okay? But his attitude is absolutely right. If you're afraid of something, what do you have to do? What do we teach our kids? You face your fears, don't you? Okay? If you're afraid of talking with other people because they're going to reject you, is that going to absolve us before God? Are we going to be able to look at God on the day of judgment and say, but I couldn't lose my best friend?
Then it's not biblical faith. See, that's why I keep going back to that all night. I mean, I can come up with the exceptions to this and think, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And I've been doing that, but I go back to biblical faith doesn't allow me to think that way. It just doesn't. And so if I cannot be afraid, I can seek help, I can get others involved, but it's not biblical faith.
In the end, you've lost your friend anyways.
Yeah.
Because you've lost them for eternity. And by the way, you might lose yourself while you're at it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no magic bullet. It's like anything else. I mean, you're right. How many of y'all ride a bicycle? Learn how to ride a bicycle. I will tell you, I never learned how to ride a bicycle. Okay? I never learned how. I do not know how. You will never see me on a motorcycle unless it's got 3 wheels. You will never see me on a motorcycle anyways because the mom would have killed me for being on one. What happens when a kid learns how to ride a bike and they fall? Every kid falls. What do parents tell them? Get up and get back on. If you don't do that, will your child ever ride a bicycle?
We got kids.
Okay, I have an excuse. I have a terrible sense of balance. That's why I cannot stay on a bicycle. Okay, I really do. I will not do a high wire either for the same reason. Okay, but yeah, generally the advice is you get back up. You get thrown off a horse. What do? Get back up. Okay. If you're afraid of something, you just have to face your fears. I'm not talking about phobias. Okay. If you're afraid of spiders, I'm not going to throw you in a room full of spiders. That would be cruel, and that's not the issue. But you're not talking about a phobia, I'm afraid to talk to my friends. You're talking about just plain old Jane daily, I'm afraid to do something kind of fear. Okay? We need to recognize the distinction. And that's my caveat to Bob Newhart. Stop it. Okay? It works sometimes. Other times it doesn't. So that's how. Face your fear and deal with it. Because that's what God expects us to do. And that's what we have to do. You think it was ever, I know the bell ring, I'll let you go in a second. You think it was ever a fearful thing for me to stand in a pulpit? I remember being 16 years old scared to death. I remember being 30 and scared to death. There are times when I still get scared when I get up in the pulpit, if I know that what I'm going to preach is something that's a difficult thing to hear. There is no way I can look at Phil, John, and Drew and say, I'm too scared to get up there today. That ain't going to fly. That dog won't hunt, right, Bob? That dog won't hunt. All right. So we're going to pick up at the very next slide after this Sunday morning. All right? Sunday morning, right at that slide.